welcome back to another ContinuousX podcast where we try to solve for X in the SDLC equation. Here with me is Mike Fitzgerald, my co-host and colleague. And in this episode, we welcome back our guest, Tom Hance, Director of Container Security at NeuVector. Welcome back, Tom.
Hey, thanks for having me again. Great to be back here.
You've gone through a couple of episodes, Tom, and this is the final one. So, in Jeopardy, this is your final Jeopardy question.
Good deal. Hope I don't have to phone a friend. Go ahead.
I doubt it, my friend.
Answer in the form of a question.
In our previous episodes, Tom, we explored securing container environments extensively. Now, let's shift our focus to the integration of these security practices into a DevSecOps approach. As organizations aim to incorporate container security measures into continuous development processes, what advice do you have to effectively integrate security from the outset? And how can they ensure that security remains a focus throughout the application's lifecycle?
Yeah, it's definitely an investment for anyone that's building, a DevSecOps environment. That's, full development, ship and run stages.
Right. Absolutely,
they have to consider the foundational components, right? When they're setting up their DevSecOps environment, you're really setting up a network to build applications on. Just that the media has changed from the olden days, and as more folks move from VMs and actual hardware to microservices, you're going to see more of this. But the foundational components have to include, all the best practice, but it has to cover the entire life cycle.
Right.
Most of the emphasis in the industry has been put on shift left, and that's still very much required. You have to have your certificates in order. Everything needs to be signed and checked and validated, so that your foundation is solid. Your drawing board is clean. You have to do your build scans and make sure that you have code integrity in the early parts of the build. You have to use some CI/CD tool to make sure that is consistent throughout the build. And then as you move your build further into the pipeline, you need to have a tool set that's capable of identifying known vulnerabilities, compliance issues, and allowing you to easily remediate those throughout that. It's just as important, however, as you move closer to production, to consider shifting right and what that really means. I mentioned in our previous podcast event that the industry has bet the farm on making sure that the preparation of your applications are secure by doing these best practice scans and things of that nature. But we really are encouraging our agency customers to move to a protect first environment where on the other end, as they approach production, they consider prevention tools, because all the scanning in the world, all the compliance tools in the world, the SBOMs, those are all preparation tools for moving code or applications into production. When you get to production, where your applications are under the most exposure to attack, that's where you need prevention tools. You need tools that can stop an attack dead. So in relation to your question, you need full lifecycle support to include not only detection and monitoring and patching and all those previous components of the supply chain, SBOM on up, but you need actual inline real-time attack prevention capability as part of your DevSecOps suite.
Yeah, normally that comes into it comes into play with like infrastructure as code and making sure that you're deploying constantly and you're making sure that your application is listing on the right port, that doesn't have any exposed ports unnecessarily. So infrastructure and deployment as part of that life cycle has to be included. And like you said, not just the application build, the image, et cetera, as it gets deployed across multiple different pre-prod and then eventually into production environments.
Right. The DevOps community really moved to containers simply to become more agile. They want the delivery, and part of being deliverable, especially in both the traditional and now tactical operations that the agencies are running, is being able to deploy these things transparently, so that the DevOps community can get their work done without being hindered by SecOps, really, but still maintain that defensive security posture as required by the agencies across the board. The actual protection component, the compliance component, the scanning component, all those things are important in a defense in depth architecture. The other component that's likely important to most is being able to replicate code once you've defined your security, your zero trust policy, to make sure that you can deploy it kind of in a cookie cutter fashion. You can replicate that code across multiple applications, across multiple clusters. Mm-hmm. In a tactical environment, you may want to move a protection deployment or protection policy set and replicate that across multiple devices or your theater of operation in that tactical environment. We have specialized technology for security as code. It's push button security as code. With a strike of a key, you can take your deployed security policy set and push that into a YAML file that you can replicate across multiple environments. Very popular with developers who either want to make sure that what they wrote in DevOps makes it into production and is tamper-proof, or if they have to, maybe in operations environment, they inherit an application and it's somewhat questionable as to the security of that. They want to run it through the NeuVector platform and use our securities code to validate that it is truly secure before deploying it in a production or tactical environment.
Yeah, I love security left. I love security right. I don't like pushing everything to the developer, but also to that point though, the last thing you want to do is that introduce something new when you run in just production. So being able to copy that and run it in another environment, or if I'm really doing something that's developing something new, I want it to run. I understand that I don't want it to run on full security lockdown mode, but I also want to make sure that it runs with good performance in a security lockdown mode. So I want to be able to turn it on and off, and that's a good idea of being able to. Okay, well, this is what it looks like in production. So let me run it in my own environment in a production-like fashion. Would be because the last thing you want is, hey, everything worked great. We got to production and it failed. It's because it's too slow or something on that.
Yeah, at NeuVector, we have three modes, principal modes of operation. One is, when you install NeuVector, it goes out and learns all your service behaviors, understands the application protocol, the packet flows, the file system access, the processes, WAF rules, DLP rules, those type things. It assembles that into a zero trust policy set. Then our customers will move it into what's called monitor mode. Monitor mode is kind of the safe mode that you just identified. There's no tax, it is wire speed, but it alerts you to any anomalous behavior or anyone breaking the rules that you learned in discovery mode. Protect mode, which is most often used in production environments, however, that's where NeuVector specifically steps in between container pairs and prevents anything that doesn't meet your predefined zero trust policy set. So if it wasn't learned and approved in a discovery and monitor mode, as handled by the developer and vetted and then pushed into production mode, if it was not learned and approved there, it does not happen with NeuVector standing guard.
Well, that's that's a really great technology, and it does kind of prove out that concept that we talked about before, even in these episodes and in the webinar about DevProtectOps, which I'm sort of adopting. Tom, but I'll always give you credit for coming up with that particular moniker. So thanks so much, Tom, for these great episodes. They're very, very insightful and thoughtful. And thank you to our listeners and our viewers for your time and attention. Stay tuned for more ContinuousX episodes where we try to solve for X in the SDLC equation.